mysterious creatures look
These motherfuckers are sticking out.
Yeah.
That's a part of it. And it's also kind of what we talked about in the first episode, where it seems like the Men in Black show up to specifically make it about them.
Yeah. Now, another woman who was a witness to both the Mothman and the Men in Black was Mrs. Marcella Bennett. She said she was forced off the road by a man driving a red Ford Galaxy, and bizarrely, the man was wearing a bushy fright wig.
There's something about this. Honestly, you're laughing. It creeps me out.
Think about
It's
it.
horrifying.
It's the Freddy Freaker thing all over again. A dude in a huge red wig is trying to force you off the road in the middle of the night.
Why is he doing it?
Yeah,
Honestly, why is he doing it? What purpose does it serve besides increasing the paranoia?
Yeah, strange stuff.
And all that time, black limousines filled with tan, Asian-looking men were knocking on doors, calling themselves census takers, and asking way too many questions about the children of the household.
All the children shit. Obsessed with the amount of like their weights and their heights, and it's very, very strange where it's being like, at some point, you're like, Mr. Census Man, you trying to make like a life-size body mold of my child to have sex with? No, we are just interested in the taste of their feet.
Oh my goodness, you can't do that.
Now, strangely enough, the crescendo of the Mothman story begins not in Point Pleasant, but 600 miles away in Mount Misery, Long Island.
What are we going to name our crappy town?
Okay, I got an idea, okay? We call it Shit Fuck Long Island.
Oh, that's a little bit long for the license plate.
Okay, how about just shit?
You know what? Let's go with Misery.
Yeah, all right. Yeah.
However, it does still involve Mr. John Keel.
This guy is everywhere.
He's everywhere.
He puts himself, it's a little bit of a gonzo story, Mothman Prophecies. He definitely puts himself in the center of it, but in a way that's so charming.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, in early 1967, a woman whom Keel refers to only as Jane was abducted along with her boyfriend from their car. And neither one of them remembered anything from their encounter, but a few months later, Jane started getting phone calls. And on May 17th, Jane answered the phone, and a metallic voice on the other end said,
Listen carefully, I cannot hear you.
And the voice then instructed Jane to go to her public library and read a specific page in a specific book on Native American history. Jane did so the next day, and when she arrived at the library, she found the building was empty, save for her and the librarian. Well, Jane said the librarian was dressed like a woman from the 40s, like a woman out of time. But to put that into perspective, that would be like saying you saw a woman dressed like it was 1998.
That's all we see.
In those fashion, I think that's in vogue now.
It's called Williamsburg.
Right.
But what I would say is that what's really strange. You see someone out of time and then doing that like thing from Ghostbusters where it's like, shh.
Dude, Ghostbusters has some legit scary moments.
Yes.
Now, the librarian had dark skin, black eyes, black hair, and only spoke in broken English. And the librarian just so happened to have the book that Jane was searching for sitting on her desk. Jane's instructions were to look at page 42. And when Jane did so, the print shrunk more and more until she couldn't read it anymore. Then the words grew until Jane could once again make out what they were saying. And this is what the page said.
Good morning, friend. You have been selected for many reasons. One is that you are advanced in autosuggestion. Through this science, we will make contact. I have messages concerning Earth and its people. The time is set. Fear not. I am a friend. For reasons best known to ourselves, you must make your contacts known to one reliable person. To break this code is to break contact. Proof shall be given. Notes must be kept of the suggestion state. Be in peace. Signed, a pal.
Jeez. All right, so she's got to tell one person about this.
Well, she's obviously also, and then if it's not real, she's suffering a massive psychotic breakdown.
Well, Jane left a little bewildered, but pretty soon she found she was being followed everywhere by the librarian.
What?
And eventually the librarian attempted a conversation, but Jane thought something a little bit off about this woman. Yeah. She said that the librarian seemed as if she was a body without a soul, and she laughed as if she was emotionally disturbed.
Ha! Ha 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 ha! If you naturally laugh like Santa Claus, you should be put into a mental asylum.
It's like everyone who paid big bucks for Gallagher tickets and they don't want to admit to themselves he's not funny. So it's like, I gotta say, $500 ticket. I will laugh at anything that he does. Man, but that makes all the sense in the world. Librarians are the perfect spies. Shh, quiet, sneaky.
Watching what you read.
Watching what you read. I've never heard one speak.
No.
They don't do it.
They do speak.
So if you had a question to them or for
When
them,
was the last time you attempted a conversation with a librarian?
the last time I had to go to a periodical, and which, by the way, I had a periodical class in high school. Thank you for that. So needed.
When is the last time you walked into a library?
When was the last time you walked into a library?
I don't have to. I mean, I just collect books.
I would say like 10 years ago. I used to
Maybe.
go to the Manhattan Public Library a lot.
The Dewey Decimal System was the dumbest thing that's ever happened in the history of books.
Library sciences.
But it makes all the sense in the world. Creepy people.
Well, when the librarian actually did speak to Jane, she just asked weird questions. One of these questions was,
Is there any AU here?
AU is the symbol for gold on the periodic table. But Jane couldn't figure out what this librarian would have for gold, especially if she's asking about it in scientific terms. And on another occasion, the librarian popped out from an alleyway, scaring the hell out of Jane, and said, quote,
Peter is coming. Why are you interested in our mount? Peter is coming very soon.
Jeez.
and as the librarian said this, a black Cadillac pulled up behind Jane, and it was driven by, again, an Asian-looking man with olive skin, sunglasses, and a gray suit. And out of the back came another guy, again, grinning, and the driver introduced himself. He extended his hand to Jane and told her his name was Apple, but spelled A-P-O-L. And just as is typical with the men in black, Apple's hands were as cold as ice. Apple then handed Jane a disc wrapped in an old parchment and told her,
Wear this always, though they will know who you are.
That's crazy.
Now, at this point, Jane had no idea why she'd been chosen for any of this. And remember, all this was happening in New Jersey. And so, Jane reached out to John Keel and mailed him the disc.
Oh, big fucking mistake. You don't go just nailing a disc.
I guess not. Yeah, it didn't work for BTK, that's for sure. Apple, Gwyneth Paltrow's son.
That's
Their
right.
daughter.
Gwyneth Paltrow's
Yeah.
son. Oh, this is the precursor to Goop.
And so, John received the package, inspected it, and then mailed it back. But when the package returned to Jane, she found that the disc was bent, had turned black, and smelled like rotten eggs.
John Keel put it up his ass.
Yeah, did he just like, how does this work? And he just sat on it for 30 minutes?
Mail tampering.
Well, yeah, the Men in Black are actually known for mail tampering.
Well, that is a part of we'll get into even deeper a little bit later on the episode. There's a sort of trickster version of this where they found people dressed as Men in Black going through people's mails, ripping up envelopes and just like throwing them in the street and kicking packages and shit like a bunch of little fucking goblins.
If I saw that, I'd say, that's a federal crime, sir. That's a federal crime right there, sir.
So after that, Keel figured he needed to glean a little more information about all this business with Apple. So he went with the old tried and true UFO abductee method of hypnotism. And the session started with Keel talking to Jane, but pretty soon, Apple took over. And reportedly, all Apple wanted to talk about at first was gossip about Robert Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe.
You think they're fucking?
Well, it's weird because it was a full 5 years after Marilyn Monroe had died.
Well,
I think they're fucking.
I think you're right about that.
And then the conversation turned serious. And specifically, it turned towards Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Apple gave a dire warning to Keel that a disaster was set to happen on the Ohio River, and many people would die as a result.
So Apple was speaking through Jane.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, John Keel, at that point, he'd been going in and out of Point Pleasant for about a year, and he knew that Point Pleasant sat at the confluence of the Kanawha and Ohio rivers. And that's why Keel wrote this in a letter to Mary Hyre on November 3rd, 1967.
I have reason to suspect there may soon be a disaster in the Point Pleasant area that will not be related to the UFO mystery. A plant along a river may either blow up or burn down. Possibly the Navy installation of Point Pleasant will be the center of such a disaster. A lot of people may be hurt. Don't even hint to anybody anything about this.
If I had to guess, I would say the TNT plant. Most likely to blow up.
TNT plant had been disused for about 20 years by that point.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
man, it was just domes. And where you go get horny.
I guess so.
How many kids came out of Point Pleasant named TNT?
I don't
Like 5 or 6.
Must
And they
be.
were immediately murdered in the army.
Oh, well, thank them for their service.
Well, the date John Keel gave for the disaster was December 15th, 1967. And on that day, in Point Pleasant, the Silver Bridge, which went over the Ohio River, collapsed and 46 people were killed.
That's so John Keel just sat there and was like, called it.
Don't.
I mean, essentially,
That's crazy.
Yeah. Now, it's said that the bridge collapsed because of a fatal flaw in the construction. But 2 days before the disaster, a couple of guys were seen climbing on the side of the bridge.
I do want to say that I believe that the real version of the Mothman Prophecies movie should be made with John Keel, like fucking busting crimes and screwing dimes in the middle of fucking like this little small town. He's like a UFO report. It's because this stuff is just some of the most compelling, the funnest stuff in high strangeness and UFO lore. We didn't even get to touch Woodrow
Derenberger.
We didn't even get to touch Woodrow yet.
Woody Derenberger.
Yes,
Yeah.
we didn't get to touch him, which is a fantastic story. We'll learn
Yeah.
about the people of Lanolus. One day we'll do a whole episode of it and end Indrid Gold.
Who plays John Keel, you think, in a film?
Who do you think?
Me, man.
We can't. Do you think, does he look a lot like you?
Yeah. He's just, wait till I shave my head, buddy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But you know what? Him and Jay Allen Hynek, you know what I love? Sporting the Van Dyke.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Now, for this entire series, we've seen the Men in Black as villains, or at the very least, annoying weirdos. These guys are literally and figuratively the black hats of the UFO universe, intimidating people, sometimes killing them, but always weirding everyone out.
Sounds like every libertarian at a dinner party, which is always. Oh, no.
But paranormal researcher and author Joshua P. Warren has a theory that the Men in Black are actually the good guys. It is his contention that the Men in Black are, in fact, time cops.
Man, we need time cops, bro.
This is easily my favorite.
Yeah, buddy.
No
What I would say is
kidding.
we need like some kind of keyboard, like time cops, and then it's a bunch of like Jean-Claude Van Damme dressed up like the Babadook,
Got to.
traveling through time.
Get
kicking
Sylvester in
people.
there.
Oh
Yeah.
no, Sylvester plays John Keel in that version
Oh,
of the time
nice.
cop story.
Now, Warren's theory is that the Men in Black are actually crime-fighting chrononauts whose specialty is time crime.
Time crime.
Meaning
That's
the reason
cool.
why they show up around UFO sightings is because the people in the UFOs are also chrononauts who are here to futz around with time for their own personal gain.
That's a top crime right there.
That is time crime, and I will warn you, Kissel, that you will get a $175 ticket in time bucks if you do not refer to aliens as chrononauts.
Right. I can't even pay that. I don't know what that is in human dollars.
It's 5 years of your time.
Oh. Wow.
Well, Warren thinks that it's possible that all the weird dudes showing up around Point Pleasant were actually chrononauts who spent a full year battling one threat or another, threats such as the Mothman, who may be an evolved being from millions of years in the future.
Who's fucking not supposed to be in our timeline? That's a time crime.
Yeah.
He comes back here to
Oh.
like show his face, but we're not supposed to see him yet because Mothman is technically a very good professional basketball player from the year 3000.
No kidding.
Oh, more like the year 3 million.
Yeah, I don't know about the wings. You'll have to raise the hoop a little bit. Seems like it's cheap.
Time crimes. Time cops.
I'd watch
Jean-Claude
that.
Van Damme kicking Mothman in the nuts.
Oh, watch out.
Mothman's got nards. That's where it comes from.
Monster Squad.
Well, in fact, Warren believes that the reason why Men in Black show up around certain cryptid activities is because those cryptids are actually hyper-evolved creatures from Earth's future. For example, when the Chupacabra first showed up in Puerto Rico, he almost immediately slaughtered a local farmer's prized pig.
Oh, no. That's amazing. I love it. And you know, if Jean-Claude Van Damme, if he did get the pink eye, he'd be like, "Oh my God, you must have met the Mothman." He'd be like, "No, that was the fickle finger of death."
No,
yes, that was actually a
you know
bad
what
night.
he'd do is he'd have that conjunctivitis, and then he'd wrap a bandana around his own eyes and start fighting blind.
have to see.
And pretty soon after that pig got slaughtered, the Men in Black showed up. Now, could it be that slaughtering that prized pig had some sort of ripple effect on time? That something in that pig's future could have set off a chain of events that could affect someone millions of years in the future? Was the pig a time fulcrum?
It was a time pig.
It was Time Pig. And then it cuts to the year 3 million, Donald Trump's head's in a big floating glass jar like in Futurama with his big floating robot dick, and that pig was supposed to be his wife.
Oh, man. Time pig.
Time Pig. Oh, I love Time Cops.
Yeah.
By the way, I love the whole theory. Cuts to also them back. You know who's a part of the whole crew? Rasputin. He gets pulled in time prison, and that's where I make this look good comes from. Put into the lore of Men in Black, where he's hanging out with them, and be like, this guy's hilarious. He's really great. He's got a huge cock, and then Jean-Claude Van Damme's like, I do not need a cock to fight, and he takes his own cock and he puts it up his own ass.
Wow.
And he's like fighting blind, no dick.
Oh, he could do it. Jean-Claude can do a lot.
Oh, yeah. And we can go even further than this pig time ripple. Think of it in the context of the Mandela effect.
Okay.
The Mandela effect, for those of you who don't know, is a theory that claims our reality is constantly shifting in both major and minor ways. And yet, some people, some of us, our memories don't shift with it. It is so named because millions of people, including myself, distinctly remember Nelson Mandela dying in prison back in the 90s, complete with
Really?
a huge funeral. I absolutely remember this.
It was a celebration because apartheid was over.
Nope.
No.
Huge
Interesting.
funeral.
Okay.
But Nelson Mandela actually died a free man in 2013.
So you mean to tell me it's the Men in Black? They showed up at Nelson Mandela's thing while he was sick, and they're like, "You need Robitussin," and he's just like, "Robitussin does sound good, my fellow countrymen. We're from Asia." Wow.
The example most people know about the Mandela effect is the whole Berenstain Bears
Right.
thing. Some people remember it as Berenstain, as I do, but it's always been Berenstain, which is ridiculous.
And a lot of folks say the Sinbad was in a genie movie, which he was not in.
And I will say, the Berenstain, because you know what it reminds me of? It just makes me think of those Charmin bears.
Yeah.
With their shit-covered toilet paper.
Yes, they always had a lesson in those books.
Now, Warren's example is a photograph of the mythological creature known as the Thunderbird that was supposedly published in a men's adventure magazine back in the 60s. And although numerous researchers clearly remember seeing the photograph, no trace of it has ever been found. And Warren's theory is that there are people constantly traveling back in time for their own advantage.
Sure. I would.
Yeah,
Is it like a vacation?
No, it's time crime.
No, dude,
It's time crime.
Time crimes. Technically, it's time crime to do it frivolously.
Okay.
That's what I would say. If
Yeah.
I was a future time crime administrator, I would say frivolous time travel is probably like dumb, unless you go to sanctioned areas where
Right.
you can go, where there's no interaction with the other people, where you have to go and like mark them off. This is very deep into time legislation, which I will
right.
present more and more as the episodes go on.
Yes, I'd like to hear your amendments on that.
Well, sometimes the time criminals are stopped by the Men in Black, and sometimes they aren't. And when they aren't, the nature of our reality changes. And for some reason, some of us remember the reality the way it was before the alteration. And the reason why the Men in Black dress the way they do, and this is according to Warren, is because they could reasonably pass themselves off as regular people at almost any point in the 20th century.
Because there's nothing more classic than the simple black suit. Simple black suit, black tie,
Sure.
white shirt. That's kind of what you go for if you're
Sure.
like going to a presentation or kind of stuff. Like, it's very simple, very classy. And
Right.
he also would drive 1960s cars that look like they're completely new.
Yeah.
Oh man, I can already I feel like I do want to start grabbing a bunch of people by their coats and just screaming like, "Time crime!" Like, where are you from? Why are you here? Time crime! Are you committed to time crime? That's interesting.
Yeah.
You commit a time crime against yourself every time you black out.
Really?
Because you're illegally time traveling to your own rules. Because
Is
you
that
wake up.
that's in your legislation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and someone in a black suit and a fedora and a tie, they might look a little more out of place in like 1995 than say 1955,
Right.
but they still aren't completely out of the ordinary. Because think of it this way. If these time cops are policing the whole of time, then logic follows that their wardrobe department has to limit themselves to centuries rather than decades.
Yeah,
Right,
and they had to get
right.
out of they had to get out of the coveralls time period because then we see that with aliens too, where they'll have coveralls or suits, and now the Greys stick to simply nude,
Yeah.
Right.
which I think is really important.
But on the other hand, all of this could just be blamed on nerds.
Yeah, man.
On nerves.
Yeah.
No.
Nerds.
On nerds.
Nerds.
Well, naturally, I think that is to yes. That's understood. What do you mean? Just because they're dressing with like pocket protectors and they look a little out of place? Is that what's happening here?
Weaponized, organized nerds.
Weaponized nerds?
Yes.
So way back in 1956, Thomas Townsend Brown founded the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, aka NICAP. NICAP was one of the more serious organizations, with people like former CIA Director Roscoe Hillenkoetter on their board of directors. Yes, Roscoe
Honestly-
Hillenkoetter does sound like a very serious man, I know.
Oh, doesn't he?
Oh yes, yeah. He has sock garters. Like I can guarantee that. Like where my grandfather, I saw my grandfather in his underpants one time, and it was like a full suit.
Oh yeah.
But it was true. NICAP actually got some real heavies in the very beginning.
Yeah.
People that went and joined and that were a part of the established spook nation of this country. The people from the OSS that turned into CIA. They were there. They were a part of creating NICAP, and
Sure.
so they took themselves very seriously.
I believe that this is after they retire from the CIA. This is like their retirement, I guess.
I actually think
group.
Roscoe Hillenkoetter was the first director of the CIA. Yeah, I mean, they had some there were some Navy guys in there, like military guys.
Because we took this fucking seriously.
Yeah.
this
Back in
was
the day.
until they finally disbanded Project Blue Book. Like they were actively trying to find out whether or not this is a threat, and then also kind of surreptitiously, the CIA kind of makes their own UFO group that can also help them investigate other UFO groups for commie behavior.
Oh, I'm sure
yeah.
we're finding out a lot of stuff right now that we'll know about in about 50 years.
Oh, yeah, and they tied up, I mean, the government and the CIA, they tied up the whole UFO thing in knots, not to necessarily discredit these guys, but to satiate these guys, where they did, like, Project Blue Book, and they
Just shut them the fuck up.
They to shut them up, and then a lot of these guys, like, they looked at it as like, oh, okay, like, that's totally above board, all right, we can quit doing this now, but other guys like Alan Hynek looked at him like, no, the guys that actually worked on it were like, no, this is fucked up. They're
got
not
flipped.
Yeah, it got totally flipped. Like, so
Cool.
it worked both ways. Now, as Nick Redfern points out, the field of UFO research is by far the most jealous of all branches of paranormal studies.
They are just hungry for results.
I don't know why
Marcus.
they hate each other so much. They should just get together.
They
Maybe
want-
they can figure something out.
They want the scoop.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Now, when an organization discovers a story, they tend to want it completely to themselves. Because if it is if it's the
Right.
egg cracker, like if it's the one that blows the whole thing wide open, they want to be the ones to do it.
I mean, it's
Yes.
just all all credibility or all what do you call that? All gratitude is just going to go to like a super wealthy person who financed them.
Well, a part of it is that that never happened in the UFO community. It was always a struggle. They were always fighting over gas money, and they are also sort of taking the model from the people that, I mean, like the CIA and the FBI, and they are all also hungry for their jurisdiction. And
Yeah.
like, this is ours. This is our story.
I think they should work together.
Yeah, because some people in the paranormal community believe that NICAP may have been taking cues from their CIA-influenced board of directors. Because you've got a guy,
Right.
you know, the first director of the CIA, guy that was in charge of G-Men, all into all sorts of like not necessarily black ops stuff, but intimidation stuff. And you've got a guy up top telling him, this is how you go and talk to people. And they think that the Men in Black, the people that, you know, criticize NICAP, they think that the Men in Black were actually just pasty, socially awkward nerds sent by NICAP to intimidate UFO witnesses. Not to keep it secret from the public, but to keep the information from rival UFO organizations.
All right, could be.
They
could
literally are doing it to keep the other people, like, telling, don't tell anybody, don't let anybody tell you, don't tell anybody else this story, essentially so that they can control the flow of information. And then because they're super nerds, they are in uniforms.
Right.
Because, like, honestly, Men in Black, for the most part, just drive like black car drivers. They dress like black car drivers, where it's like the simple black suit, which is why they're all ill-fitting, because they went to Men's Warehouse and didn't go to a tailor.
Right. You got to. So they're pasty like Sheamus from the WWE, very white, frighteningly so.
Yes.
And this makes all the sense in the world to me. They're naturally awkward.
Yeah. Oh, of course.
They're naturally awkward, though.
cripplingly
Don't nerds, they know about tech. Wouldn't they have been able to figure out how to turn that recording machine on?
Not when you're surrounded by people. That's the problem. All eyes
nervous.
on you. Not only
Nervous nerds.
Yes, you're a nervous nerd. You're dressed completely out of character. You put a suit on that's making you sweat all the time, but your hands are still cold because you got blood issues.
Got to, yeah,
And you're
always.
sitting there fidgeting with a tape recorder while a bunch of, like, women are staring at
Perhaps.
you. They're not doing anything.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the opinion of many paranormal researchers that NICAP is probably responsible for a large portion of Men in Black encounters over the years, and a lot of it has to do with just the name. See, if you're just like a country bumpkin in 1960 and someone from the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena shows up at your door looking like a G-man and flashing an official looking ID telling you to shut the fuck up about your UFO sighting, it's gonna freak you out.
Oh, absolutely. I totally get that.
I'll tell you what, ma'am. We've heard tell about you speaking about UFOs to the papers, and that must stop this instant. Also, I am running low on Mountain Dew Code Red. Do you have any? And I must abscond it for the government.
That's a time crime, my friend. That person's obvious from 1999.
Anachronism! Anachronism!
Wow, time crime. Code Red did not come on board until 1999 or whatever it was.
I'm too soft for time jail.
Oh,
Just in there with fucking Marquis de Sade and Hitler's double.
Yeah, man. And if that country bumpkin tells that story to a whole other set of nerds that show up later, they're probably going to assume that it's all a part of a conspiracy. And the